Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. It all started a few months ago, when my new neighbors moved into the house next door, and ever since then the situation became a real nightmare. They were incredibly loud, and since I worked from home, the constant noise was driving me crazy day after day. Their small children screamed until late at night, keeping me from sleeping, and their dogs barked nonstop all day long in the backyard. To be honest, I felt sorry for the animals, since they used to keep them locked up in cages almost all the time, so I couldn't blame them for their behavior. Even so, although my new neighbors were exasperating and seemed not to care about anyone else, I'm not the kind of person who enjoys confrontations, so I decided to put up with the noise and get used to that unbearable routine. This went on for a couple of months, until one night I heard a heated argument out on the street, which immediately caught my attention. To add some context, my neighbors were a young couple with 2 small children. I had barely exchanged any words with them during all that time, beyond a hello or good afternoon when we happened to cross paths. The man drove a white van, which he seemed to use for work. That night, when I heard the fight, I saw him standing in front of the van arguing with an older man. A few days went by, and I noticed something strange. The white van, which was always parked in front of their house, had disappeared. I also realized that you could no longer hear the dogs barking or the children crying at night. I have to admit that, deep down, I felt great satisfaction at that sudden quiet. I thanked heaven for finally being able to enjoy some peace and silence, letting out a deep sigh of relief. I thought maybe they had gone on vacation for a few days or something like that, but as the weeks went by, the usual noise didn't come back. The house next door remained completely silent, with no signs of movement or voices coming from there. However, something felt strange to me. All the front windows stayed open for days, which made that silence even more unsettling. I started to think that maybe the argument I had heard was with the owner, and that the family decided to leave suddenly. Since I worked from home, I could keep an eye out, but I never saw the van again or any moving truck. As time passed, I began to hear strange sounds coming from their house. I live in a townhouse, so my house is attached to theirs, and since the building is old, the walls that separate us aren't exactly thick. One night, while I was trying to sleep, I heard a weird noise coming from inside my closet. It's a built-in closet, the kind that sits directly against the wall dividing both houses. So the back of the closet is actually the wall of the adjacent room. I stayed lying there, listening to that scraping sound, and I started to worry. I thought maybe there was a mouse or something like that. I slowly sat up and turned on the lamp next to my bed. My heart was pounding. I really don't like bugs or animals that hide inside the house. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shone the light into the closet, checking every corner carefully. But I didn't find anything. I felt a momentary sense of relief until I heard the noise again. Startled, I jumped back, almost dropping my phone from the shock. The sound echoed in my ears, getting louder and louder, as if something were scratching at the wall, trying to force its way through from the other side. I had to cover my mouth with my hand so I wouldn't scream in fear. That couldn't have been a simple mouse. It was too intense, too real. Panic began to take over as I tried to imagine what the hell was happening on the other side of that wall. And then suddenly, the sound stopped. I stayed completely still, counting the seconds, breathing with difficulty, waiting for it to happen again. But nothing else was heard. That night, unable to stay in my room, I decided to sleep downstairs, just so I wouldn't have to hear that terrifying scratching again, which still echoed in my head. Over the following days, the noises continued, although they moved around within the neighboring house. Sometimes they were muffled thuds, other times strange movements, but I was never able to identify their exact source. Luckily, I never heard the scraping sound again, although the knocks and creaks kept showing up from time to time, maintaining an unsettling atmosphere. I began to think that maybe the neighbors came back from time to time to pick up their things, but I never actually saw them. Nor did you hear the children's voices or the dogs barking, and that made it even more disturbing. From my bedroom, I can see the backyard of their house, and every time I looked out the window, the cages where they used to keep the dogs were still there, empty. One day, while I was working, I heard a very peculiar creaking sound coming from the back of their house. I stayed still, leaving what I was doing, and strained my ears to figure out exactly where it was coming from. When I left the windows open, I used to clearly hear the dogs moving inside their cages, and the bars squealed or creaked every time they shifted around. But this time, even though the sound was the same, something didn't add up. I remained silent, paying attention, and I could make out what seemed to be the movement of dogs inside the cages. I immediately got up and ran upstairs to the bedroom, from where I had a direct view of the neighbor's yard. However, when I looked down, the cages were still completely empty. A chill ran down my spine. It was just one more of the many strange things I had noticed over the last few weeks. And then the most terrifying thing of all happened. It was just a few days ago, and this time I didn't just hear it. I also saw it. I had just come back from the supermarket, carrying several bags, and as I approached my door, I noticed that my neighbor's front door was slightly open. I stopped for a few seconds, watching, expecting someone to come out or something to move inside. But the house remained still and silent. Thinking it was just another oddity among many, I went about my business and went inside to put the groceries down in the kitchen. When I finished and went to close my own door, my curiosity got the better of me. I went back out, walked slowly down my driveway, and cautiously approached the door next door. In the short time it took me to put the bags away, the door had opened even more. Now I could partially see inside, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The door was half open, just enough to let me see the entry hallway. On the floor there were little children's shoes and toys scattered everywhere. To the left, a light was still on, probably the kitchen light at the end of the hallway. "Hello?" I asked softly with a lump in my throat. I pushed the door a little further, and a blast of cold air rushed out from inside, making me jump back immediately. At that exact moment, the kitchen door swung wide open, and for a brief instant I thought I could make out a dark figure standing in the doorway. Without thinking, I ran straight back to my house and locked the door as my heart pounded wildly out of control. I sank to the floor, trying to catch my breath, while my mind filled with chaotic thoughts and unanswered questions. You should know that although I love horror stories, I get scared easily when something strange happens in my own home. And just as I was starting to calm down, I heard 3 sharp knocks on my front door. I froze, not daring to move a single muscle. A minute passed, then another, and nothing else was heard. With my heart in my throat, I opened the door slowly, but as I expected, there was no one there. To this day, no one on the street knows what happened to my neighbors. They simply disappeared without a trace. I haven't seen that dark figure again since then, although sometimes strange noises can still be heard coming from that house. I only hope that, whatever it is that lives there, it never decides to cross the wall that separates us. Story 2. It all started in late August 2019, right after I moved into the house where I currently live. I live in a small town in Florida, and it all began with small things disappearing or showing up out of place, along with strange feelings and unusual noises. From the very beginning, I never felt like I was alone, even when I knew for certain that there was no one else in the house. I have 2 roommates and a daughter. One of them now almost always stays over at his girlfriend's house, probably because of the weird things we keep experiencing here. The first night, the house was still unorganized, with boxes everywhere and nothing in its place. I left my most important bag, where I carried my sketchbook, my phone charger, my makeup, and other personal belongings. Then I got distracted by something and started putting a few things away. While I was doing that, as always, I put on music, so my phone's battery started draining quickly. Naturally, I went to look for my charger inside the bag, but it wasn't there. I checked every corner of my room, then the kitchen and the living room, which were the only places I had been, but I couldn't find it anywhere. My roommates have several cats, and one of them also owns a very noisy chihuahua. That night, around 10 p.m., I heard something fall in the empty room at the end of the hallway, right next to the living room. I thought it was the cats or the dog, but at that moment the chihuahua started barking nonstop. I went to check, since I didn't want it to keep barking, and also to make sure nothing had happened to it. When I walked into the room, I saw it immediately. Several boxes had been knocked onto the floor, most of them filled with books and action figures. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My charger was there, in the middle of the mess, in a room I hadn't been in at all. How did it get there? I had put it inside my bag before coming, and I remember perfectly seeing my roommate put those boxes in when he moved in. I even saw him take out one of his favorite comic books during his lunch break, and my charger wasn't there then. I'm completely sure of that. The next night, my keys disappeared, and to this day I still haven't found them. It's been more than a year and a half, and I still wonder whether they'll ever show up. After that, my cat started behaving in a very strange way. For example, Philip Fry, one of them, would become hysterical every time I left him alone in my room. He would meow desperately, puff up completely, and run to hide in the most unusual corners. I don't remember exactly how I managed to get him to stop doing it, but it took me quite a while to calm him down. My other cat, Jingles, was always the opposite. Calm, quiet, and very sleepy. She's a black cat of about 10 years old, so it was strange to me that she started following me all around the house almost all the time. A couple of months later, in late October, almost a year ago now, my daughter was home, but she was already sleeping deeply. Ever since we moved, she has always been a heavy sleeper, and by 8 p.m. she's usually already in bed. I was in the living room, watching TV quietly and flipping through a few books, trying to sketch a drawing. That night, both roommates were working. They do night shifts, while I work during the day, so I was completely alone. Just as I was starting to focus on my drawing, I began to hear a strange sound. At first, I couldn't identify it, so I muted the television and listened carefully. Then a heavy, unsettling feeling started to take over, because I finally recognized the sound. It was a child's laughter, and also a voice murmuring something, as if a child were talking and playing. But it didn't sound normal. There was something unnatural about it, something that made my blood run cold, as if that laughter didn't belong to this world. Immediately, I ran to my daughter's room, fearing the worst. Just as I suspected, she was still deeply asleep. She hadn't moved an inch. The room was silent, so still it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Nothing seemed out of place, but the atmosphere in the house felt threatening, charged with something I couldn't see but could sense. Sometimes, even when I'm sure I'm completely alone, I feel like there's someone else with me. Oh, and there's something I forgot to mention at the beginning of this story. When we first moved in, the maintenance man told us something that at the time seemed pretty strange to me. He told us that, during the 10 years he had worked for that landlord, no one had been able to finish the lease in this house. Everyone left early, some in less than 6 months. He said he had seen everything: couples breaking up, people getting seriously ill, people losing their minds, and even mysterious car accidents. It seemed like a simple streak of bad luck, or at least, that's what I thought at the time. Though sometimes I wonder if it has something to do with the house itself. To this day, I still live here, and from time to time I keep hearing those strange sounds that remind me that maybe I'm never really alone. Story 3. I rented a small apartment in a not very good neighborhood for 3.5 years, with the goal of saving money. When I moved in, the first thing I did was try to make it more secure. I replaced the old lock on the front door with a new one and also changed the doorknob, since the previous one was broken. The windows were old and poor quality, the kind that opened by sliding sideways, made of cheap aluminum. The latches were terrible. The back door led out to a small patio with a deck, and that worried me a bit, so I decided to reinforce it as well. For extra security, I bought some pieces of sturdy wood and cut them to the exact measurements of the window tracks and the patio door track. That way, if someone tried to get in, they would have to break the glass instead of simply opening them from the outside. From the beginning, I had the feeling that the person who lived there before might have been involved in illegal activities, because of the kind of strange visitors who showed up and the weird questions they asked about Sam, the former tenant. During the first 6 months, there were at least 4 occasions when somewhat confused people knocked on my door asking for this Sam. Some of them looked like tweakers, drug users, which left me pretty unsettled. From then on, I made sure to double-check that all the doors were properly closed all the time. Even so, I have to admit that sometimes I forgot to lock the front door. One night, when I made that mistake, something truly creepy happened. It was a dark evening, and I was in the kitchen making dinner. I went to the bathroom for a moment, washed my hands, and then went back to the kitchen. When I walked in, I saw a middle-aged man, dressed entirely in black, coming up the stairs from the entryway toward where I was. I froze, shocked, and asked him in a trembling voice, "Who are you?" The man calmly replied that he had come to repair a toilet. My mind filled with dangerous thoughts. What if he was a burglar, or something worse? Even so, I tried to keep my composure and spoke with him for a couple of minutes before doing something drastic, like grabbing a kitchen knife to defend myself. The man explained that Gary, the landlord, had sent him to fix a broken bathroom. I told him that Gary was not my landlord and that my bathroom was perfectly fine. Then he asked to verify the address he had gone to. I gave it to him, and when he heard it, he apologized repeatedly, assuring me he had gone to the wrong place. He carefully went back down the steps, put on the boots he had left at the entrance, and left looking embarrassed. To this day, I'm not completely sure what really happened. Maybe that man was looking for Sam, perhaps to collect on an old debt, and decided to leave when he realized Sam no longer lived there. Or maybe he mistook me for someone else and changed his mind when he saw me. Although, on the other hand, it's possible he really was a confused worker, sent by some guy named Gary to fix a toilet in another home, and he simply got the address wrong. Either way, that night left me with a sense of fear that took days to shake off. And ever since then, I never forgot to lock the door again. Story 4. I used to spend a lot of time with a somewhat unstable girl. For safety, I'll call her Jane, although that isn't her real name. If she ever found out I'm telling this, she'd probably get extremely angry. And knowing her, I don't want to take that risk. Jane had had a very hard life. Her family was a complete mess, and a large part of her problems came from her father, a man who hurt her a lot. When he finally died and was gone from her life forever, Jane told me she had gone to the funeral only to find out where he was buried. A few days later, in the middle of the night, she called me on the phone. Her voice sounded shaky, but determined. She asked me to take her to the cemetery because she wanted to destroy her father's headstone. Even though I would never do something like that, no matter how much I hated someone, I understood why she wanted to. Her relationship with him had been a nightmare. Jane didn't have a driver's license, so I went to pick her up and drove to the place. When we parked in front of the cemetery, Jane pulled a hammer and several grocery bags out of her purse. She explained that she wanted to break the headstone into small pieces, put them into the bags, and leave. Without saying anything else, we got out of the car and walked quickly among the graves. Jane knew exactly where the grave was, so it didn't take long for us to find it. Even so, I was nervous. The place had a heavy energy, like we weren't supposed to be there, disturbing the dead in the middle of the night. I tried to stay calm and give her space, while she knelt in front of the recent grave, whispering curses and sobbing. I could feel all the anger and pain built up in her voice. But suddenly, she started screaming, and the sound made my blood run cold. I turned to tell her to lower her voice, but she wasn't listening anymore. She screamed, cried, and hit the headstone with a fury that seemed inhuman. Each time the hammer came down, only a tiny piece came off, and I realized we would be there for a long time if she kept going like that. The noise was so loud that I was afraid nearby neighbors or a passerby would hear us. For a moment, I imagined how terrifying it would be for someone to walk past the cemetery and hear those screams in the darkness. My instincts told me something wasn't right. I started to worry, not about ghosts, but about Jane. She was out of control, moving clumsily, full of rage, trapped in her own trauma, and I was alone with her, in a dark cemetery, surrounded by graves. I was afraid that if I got too close, she might mistake my face for her father's and attack me. Over time, her fury began to fade little by little, exhausted. She stopped, staring at the headstone. She had barely managed to break a third of it. Then she looked up at me, and in that moment I saw something in her eyes that I will never forget. It was a look of pure madness, a spark that froze my soul. I always knew Jane wasn't entirely well, but that night she crossed a line. Suddenly, she stood up abruptly, pressed the hammer against my chest, and ordered me to finish the job. At first I refused, telling her that this was something she needed to do, not me. But as soon as I finished speaking, she grabbed me by the ears and forced me to look straight into her eyes. Then she screamed so loudly I thought my eardrums would burst. With a voice distorted by rage, she threatened me. If I didn't break the headstone for her, she would hit me with a hammer and bury my body next to her father's. That was when I understood I was trapped, that it was already too late to back out. So I gave in, my heart pounding at its limit, and decided to finish quickly. I was stronger than she was, but also more aware of the danger. I started hitting the headstone with all my strength, trying to get it over with as fast as possible. Jane laughed behind me like a maniac, cheering me on with screams, like a witch celebrating a human sacrifice. I tried not to pay attention, but it was impossible. When I turned my head slightly, I saw she had a knife in her hand, and a chill ran through my entire body. Before I could react, she knelt behind me, sat on my back, and wrapped her arms around me, whispering terrifying things into my ear. I stopped hitting the stone, afraid of hurting her or that she might attack me at any moment. She whispered in my ear that I was almost finished, and then she did something I will never be able to forget. She moved her hands in front of me, one of them holding the knife, very close to my chest. In that moment, my survival instinct kicked in. I shoved her with all my strength, managed to free myself from her weight, and ran without looking back. I got into the car, started the engine with trembling hands, and sped away until I got home. That same night, I blocked her number and all her social media, and I never spoke to her again. To this day, I don't know what she did after I left, and I don't want to know. I only hope that someday she gets the help she needs, and that no one else has to live through something like that. And if a friend ever suggests a night adventure, think twice, because not all monsters live under the bed. Some use your name and call you on the phone, and if you want to share your own creepy story, you can send it to us. Don't forget to like the video. Thank you.